So it's 5:05, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. Welcome to everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your interest in the work of this board, and thank you for your interest in the district. Let's begin with the invocation. Mr. Gilzine.
At this time, I would like to introduce Pastor. Is this not on? No, there it is. Okay. At this time, I would like to introduce Pastor Jim Book, the lead minister of Kissimmee Christian Church. Pastor Book has served in his role for 12 years and is also the president of Advanced Center for Ministry Training. He is married to his lovely wife, Jeanette, for over 32 years. Together, they have 3 lovely daughters, Emily, Macy, and Mandy. Pastor, will you lead us in prayer?
Thank you so much for this opportunity to ask God's blessing on our meeting tonight. Would you bow with me in prayer? Father in heaven, as the board here discusses tourism and providing the quality infrastructure for those who visit, I'm reminded of the words in Jeremiah, 29th chapter, where you encouraged and commanded Israel as they were in exile in Babylon to build their houses, to plant gardens, take their wives, have grandkids, and you said that they may increase and not diminish. And then you ask your people, even in exile, to seek the peace of the city. This board, Father, has a huge responsibility to provide so much for so many people coming in into the hotels and the tourist areas, and then providing the quality infrastructure to make sure that those who live here are cared for. And so I'm asking for wisdom on behalf of this board and the number of organizations that are represented in this room this afternoon. And that is simply this, that in our efforts to provide the best experience we can for folks as they make their way into Central Florida, that we too will, as you commanded your people, even in exile, to seek the peace of the city. That's what we want to do. We want people coming here to experience that. And so in order to do that, we seek for wisdom and guidance. And you concluded those words by saying, you'll be carried away. Pray to the Lord for its peace. For if the city has peace, then we will have peace. And may that be our desire, even now. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Pastor, thank you so much for the blessing and for those wise words. Next, let's honor this great nation with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, our safety procedures, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To our guests and visitors, this meeting is in the afternoon, different from our morning meetings. So I'd like to start by saying that in the event of an evacuation, we would normally have employees in the district that would don a safety vest and meet you at the ends of the parking lots. There are no employees here this afternoon. They've all gone home for the day, but please follow that same procedure. If we do need to evacuate, make your way out the nearest exit. We have the exit in the front of the building where you entered. There's also one through these 2 doors that will lead you out through the back of the building. Make your way to the ends of the parking lot so that we can take attendance, make sure everyone is exited, and then we can wait for emergency responders to tell us when it's safe to come back in. If we do need an AED or a first aid kit, we have those available at the security desk, and we will get those and bring them in to provide them care for whoever needs it. Thank you very much and enjoy the meeting.
Thank you. And next, public comments. We have one public comment from Ms. Debbie McDonald. Welcome back, Ms. McDonald.
Thank you.
And just for the record, indicate whether you're here in a representative capacity.
Just me. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Board. Good evening. I'm here today. Thank you. Appreciate that. I'm here today to remind the board to please focus on their job and stop stirring up controversy and chaos. The seemingly political moves the board is making are generating negative publicity, costing taxpayer millions in legal fees, and significantly lowering employee morale. The employee turnover that this unnecessary chaos has caused is alarming. The chief of public works, the chief of facilities, and the fire chief have all resigned or retired early, along with countless employees. Mr. Clausey, the previous administrator, was escorted out of the building after he was dismissed. And Mr. Glazine, your assistant also has resigned after being here for many, many years. If this chaos continues, there will be many more essential employees who leave because they feel silenced and intimidated. Ultimately, your primary job is to run a special district, of which there are hundreds in Florida. I live in a special district as well. Also down the road are seniors that live in the villages up the road. These districts have many needs, including infrastructure, disaster preparedness, and long-term planning for growth. Everyday district needs should be the focus of this board. Instead, it appears this board was assembled to create chaos through controversial moves that don't benefit anyone. The only beneficiary of this manufactured chaos is Ron DeSantis and apparently a wing of the Republican Party of Florida. And I'm not sure how that is going. I look forward to the debate tonight. I want to remind the board and this audience that legal fees are piling up in the millions, and they're eating away at the budget that could be helping build infrastructure and employees in a time of high inflation and much more. In the end, people often vote for Republicans because they want their government out of the way. Instead, we see a government that's being weaponized and is carrying out political revenge at all of our expense, especially the employees who work for this district. These are nice people. They have families, and they were very, very loyal. People migrate to Florida for freedom, not to live in a place where public institutions are leveraged by a small, well-connected group of people to carry out an agenda that few want. I urge the board to engage in long-term thinking and challenge them to stay out of the press and actually govern this district. Again, please consider compromise with Mr. Eisner. Thank you.
Mr. Iger.
Iger. Sorry. Mike was a while ago with Mr. Eisner, Bob Iger. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you for your comments. And now we'll go to the consent agenda. Is there anyone that wants to pull any items from the consent agenda?
Mr. Chair, I would like to have a discussion on item 6.3, please.
Okay. Will we have discussion now?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
At this time, I would like to bring up Mike. At this time, I would like to bring up our acting fire chief to give a presentation on 6.3.
Good afternoon, Mr. Gozine and members of the board. I'm Eric Ferrari. I'm the acting fire chief and here to present to you the proposal for the purchase of 2 new Class A pumpers. These are the fire engines that we use in our fleet. So we are proposing a purchase from Sutphin Extreme Duty Trucks, and we currently own one Sutphin. It's the first in our fleet. We took delivery of the Sutphin just a few months ago, along with a competitor just behind it from Pierce, and these were the 2 competing bids for this purchase. We operate 4 frontline engines in our jurisdiction, 1 at each fire station. And frontline fire engines have approximate 10-year service life, but typically not more than 15 years. And there are a lot of factors that affect the refresh cycle, wear and tear, hours on the pump, maintenance issues, and then if there is a significant change to the standard that the engines are built to, a safety change might prompt an earlier change out of an engine. Next slide. So for us, our frontline engines, after approximate 10 years, go into reserve status, and we'll keep them in reserve status for upstaffing purposes, and also while the frontline engines are being serviced, we can put a reserve engine in that is beyond that 10-year life cycle but still continue to be maintained. We typically will not run a piece of apparatus beyond 20 years. That's a good benchmark to retire it. And then this purchase that we're proposing would replace frontline units engine 31 and engine 11. So these Sutphins would be expected to be delivered sometime in FY 2027. We're targeting February 27 due to production delays and resource availability. That's the latest they'll deliver the unit. There's a potential they could deliver a few months earlier, which of course we would welcome. So as I mentioned before, we previously purchased from Sutphin and Pierce. They're two competing companies and manufacturers. When you place them side by side in the bid cycle, Sutphin came back a little bit higher. However, it really was an apples to oranges comparison. And fortunate for us, we took delivery of these two units brand new and were able to physically put them side by side and compare them. And just to take you back a little bit, we purchased these two units during coming out of COVID based on availability. They have very limited availability in fire apparatus, and there wasn't much choice. We needed to get apparatus here, and these two manufacturers could have delivered on time, and that's how we ended up with them. But when you put them side by side, the Sutphin has increased water capacity. All fire engines carry water on board. So you have a 750-gallon versus 500-gallon tank on board, and then a significant storage space on the Sutphin, enhanced storage capability. In the fire service, we like to pack a lot of equipment on the engine to get as much as we can on scene, and the Sutphin definitely more accommodating to that need. And then when you look at the build of both units, both acceptable. We're happy with both units. However, the Sutphin by far is in a league of its own. And the last, in working with Fleet, they have a local representative that can be on site here quickly. For Sutphin. Pierce, they're up in Sanford. Not huge difficulty, but definitely more convenient to have a local representative on site should we need them. So this purchase will be funded through FY 2025 through that operating account, the 560-9506, and we'll pay half $902,040, and then the remainder in FY 26 $902,040. And so we're asking for your approval for this purchase. And I'll entertain any questions.
Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point out that when I first met with the men and women of our fire department, particularly our fire union, the first thing I heard wasn't about compensation. It was about life safety and the age of the vehicles, and particularly some frontline vehicles. And Chief, I just wanted to confirm, is it my understanding, and when this board was appointed, that we had several frontline vehicles that were over 15 years old, and maybe even one or two that were over 20 years old?
That's correct. Yeah, we definitely had an aging fleet, and then coming out of COVID, we were really in a bind. And now with the two new engines that we took delivery on that were this year make and model, and then the other that I mentioned around the 2015 mark. So our fleet has definitely now taken a leap forward.
Excellent. I just wanted to thank this board and Mr. Gilzine and you for your leadership, and the fire union and all the men and women of our first responders for bringing this issue up and getting us back onto that 10-year frontline, 15 to 20-year reserve, and replacing those vehicles as they should be replaced in best practices. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, sir. We're in much better shape today than we were 2 years ago, without a doubt, both on the frontline engine and also on the rescue front, the ambulances that we own and maintain.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions or comments from my fellow board members? Chief, thank you very much for that very informative report. We appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
I wanted, yeah,
I'm sorry.
It's very loud. No, I just wanted to highlight, because I think I heard the public comments, and I've heard this before. And again, this board being very unique setup, we had to start from ground zero almost to put it in place for best practices. One being the procurement policy that we just put in place. And I think it's really important with a lot of people watching. The intent is to be transparent and have good systems in place to have this run as an efficient government operation. So I just wanted to highlight that. And I thank you for the leadership, Mr. Garcia, and also by Mr. Gilzine.
Well, thank you for those comments. Any other questions or comments from the board? Or no? Hearing none. Thank you again, Chief, for that
Yes, sir.
very informative report. Let me ask Mr. Arterman, so this has been pulled from the consent agenda. Do we vote on that separately?
You can go ahead and consider the entire consent agenda in its total. It was just a discussion about one of the items, so you're fine in approving the consent agenda in toto.
Okay, perfect. With that explanation, is there a motion that we approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Let the record reflect that the vote passed unanimously. Okay, next, reports, management reports. Mr. Gilzine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. During our meeting today, we have several acknowledgements, including our first Employee Excellence Award, along with the celebration of my good friend, retired Mr. Mike Rickenbaugh. We're grateful for all of our employees, and we want to publicly acknowledge their dedication and sacrifice. Simultaneously, the district will be implementing new programs to increase transparency operations, including new procurement process, as we just alluded to a second ago by our board member, which allow for the adoption of contracts on today's agenda. We've also started union negotiation for the B unit. And lastly, we finalized our fiscal year 24 budget and addressed the annual pass program that has been in the news. I want to take a moment to discuss each of these in details, beginning with our beloved good friend, Mike Rickenbaugh. I'd like to acknowledge the retirement of the legendary Mike Rickenbaugh. Mike retired from our building and safety department after 20 years of service. Although Mike has retired at the beginning of this month, he was so gracious to return here today with his beautiful bride, so that way we can honor him and recognize him. For those who don't know Mike, he's an institution in the district. He has brought so much joy to countless families across the world. I know he had a lot to do with the Expedition Everest roller coaster ride at Animal Kingdom and many other beloved favorites for generations of families. His contributions to hotels and attractions across the districts are an incredible testament to his abilities. He's always emphasized pride and ownership, which is reflected in the quality of his work. More than that, Mike is just an overall good guy. He supports his team and always goes the extra mile to get the job done. In fact, I have a piece of correspondence from Mr. Rob Wagner, the Senior VP of Construction from the Drury Development, that highlights Mike's remarkable character. Mr. Wagner writes, "It has been great working with you, Mike, over the last few years. As many have told you, my first impression of you were one of a hardline, no compassion, no flexibility, government building official. Boy, was I wrong. The evening you turned around for me while sitting in traffic was one that I'll never forget. I think I teared up when you agreed to do so. The simple act of human kindness showed me that you were invested as much as I was to get our project open for business. I would have done anything you asked after that point. It really had a big impact on me. Every time I pull up to our hotel, I think about the evening and the guests is that when I was no longer a jury employee, I will always think about the gesture as I pull up to this hotel. Please note that our last hotel project you helped us complete was a difficult one, but wonderful. And you have made our hotel much better. And you have made our hotel process much better. And for that, I'm forever grateful." Right, Rob? Mike has set the example not just for our team, but for our taxpayers. We appreciate his dedication. Although I know Kenny and Ryan are holding down the fort, Mike, we will miss you. At this time, I'd like to call Mike up to the front so we can do a photo and celebrate you further. I don't know if you have a couple of remarks, do you? Of course you do. You're Mike. You have a couple of remarks. So why don't you come up, share, and then we'll take a photo. Okay. Of course he has remarks. It's Mike.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gilzine, for amazing comments, and thank you for having me back. I have a kind of a history of saying something that after I say it, I think about it and say, I probably shouldn't have said it differently. So what I wanted to say was, since September 8th, this is the first time I've had long pants on. So it feels a little different. But really, the first thing I really want to say is I miss you. I can't tell you how much I miss you. And that's the toughest part in this whole thing. is missing everybody every day, and the interaction that we've had, the impact we had on this district. But I want to thank Mr. Gilzine again, Paula, for the nice retirement party that I had. But it was all made great by the employees and all the effort that was put forth. Since I left, since I had that party, I watched the video, I look at all the gifts, and I live it over and over and over. And it's just, it'll never stop. And I can't tell you how much that means to me. But I'll quickly say that in August of 1979, I accepted my first building official position in an energy boom time town in Wyoming. I took that job from an architect who had it prior to me. I didn't know what was going to be ahead of me in my career. I could have never imagined it. But to end up here after 20 years of providing safe environment, in a built environment for the tens of millions of people that come here is incredible. I became the building official here after an architect also. I started that way and I ended that way. And for some reason in my mind, it's like, wow, that's amazing. But in the building department and the professional team that we have in our building department, I've always said we're the silent defenders. We're the people that are behind the scenes, making sure that all the life safety elements in the building are there for workers and guests, for us. And I can't ever be able to quantify the respect I have for the department and those that work there. They're highly professional. And what comes to mind is in the first 6 months of this year, at least 182 times, the inspection team modified their daily work schedule to come in early or work over a weekend to accommodate safe inspections for the user and the guest. We were successful because we had a common goal with the taxpayers and owners within the district, and that was safety in the built environment. So I'm proud of that, and I thank you for all of this. Thank you.
Who's going to do the picture? Do you have the proclamation? Ah, there it is. Okay, and where do you want us to stand? Yeah. Do you want board members to come up?
That'd be great.
Yeah.
If everybody came around.
And then we got some flags. Okay. Oh,
There we go. Everybody look here. Look here and smile. Smile. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I just forgot to mention that my granddaughter flew in today just for this. No, she came here to have vacation at Disney World. So anyway, I want to recognize her and her husband.
Mike, you gotta acknowledge your wife. Come on.
Well, you already acknowledged her, and you know, that was
See?
that was one of those things right there. I'll think about that.
Only 53 years of now.
Yeah. Yeah, so forget what she just said. We've been married 53 years this month, so.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Over the last several months, I've been listening to and addressing employee concerns via my outreach and open door policy. I've taken these concerns to heart, and I'm very grateful for the team, and will do everything possibly and take a little moment of today's meeting to show it. With that in mind, we have a few more promotions to announce and awards to grant. We'll start with the promotions. For those who are unaware, Ms. Tanya Naylor was recently promoted to Director of Security and Emergency Management. Tanya has worked within the bounds of the fire department, but given our new emphasis on public safety in the district, she's been recently elevated to Director and reports directly to me. For those who missed the last board meeting, Tanya has led the charge for our hurricane response and did so with precision and excellence. Tanya's career started at Walt Disney World in 1996 and was on the opening task force for Hong Kong Disneyland. She joined the security team in 2007 as a frontline leader in the Parks, Resorts, and Communications Center before joining management in 2010. As an area security manager, Tanya was responsible for background department, labor, and scheduling. She ultimately took over the area management position at the Communication and Emergency Operations Center in 2011. Tanya joined the district in 2014 as the first emergency manager. She served with us for almost 10 years. Tanya works around the clock to ensure all taxpayers, guests, and employees stay safe. She jokingly called herself the doom and gloom because if it can go wrong, she has already considered it and has an action plan to either prevent disaster or respond to mitigate and minimize any issues. Thank you, Tanya, for worrying so we don't have to. We appreciate everything you do to keep us safe. The second promotion announcement is that of Michelle Dykes. Michelle was recently promoted to Director of Human Resources earlier this summer, but has yet to be properly acknowledged, which is why we're doing this today. Michelle's career started in the district in 2006. In fact, she was recently celebrating her 17-year anniversary on Monday. Congratulations, Michelle. Although many know Michelle for her work in the benefits area, she has much larger impact on the entire district. She has always been involved and volunteered for events, recently becoming the chairperson for the Employee Engagement Committee. She also is a member of the national and local HR benefits and compensation organizations locally. Michelle is an exceedingly pleasant person who sets the tone for her department and the district as a whole. We truly appreciate Michelle's commitment to our employees' well-being and public service. Michelle, you're already thriving in your position, and we wish you the best as you continue your new role. Let's congratulate both Tanya and Michelle. We appreciate the work you do each and every day. All right, so the next segment of business, which is one of my favorite, where I'm excited about bringing this effort forward. It's been a function that went defunct for the past couple of years, and we've brought it back and enhanced it and make sure that we can analyze, but more importantly, recognize our colleagues, and we're always going to do them at board meetings going forward. So here we are. Let's see. Earlier this month, everyone in the district should have received a correspondence announcing a new employee incentive program, the Excellence Awards, which recognize the exceptional work of our employees who undertake each and every day. The award program consists of 4 levels, bronze, silver, gold, and platinum, which allow employees to earn up to $2,000 for their outstanding contributions to the district. I'd like to once again acknowledge Michelle, our Director of Human Resources. Michelle is the first recipient of the Employee Excellence Awards. For those who are unaware, Michelle was very strategic was a strategic leader who stepped outside of her duties to collaborate and launch the first ever summer youth internship program in conjunction with Neo City and Career Source. We know that there was other colleagues that supported her, but she allowed this program and allowed the local students to learn more about the district and how it functions, while providing real-world experience to high school students in fields such as accounting, science, construction, and emergency management. While she worked collaboratively with other departments to establish this program, Michelle's leadership and follow-through allowed these students to thrive. She went above and beyond her role by undertaking the responsibilities in lieu of her supervisor. Her contribution included attending job fairs to help interview the students for our program, establish a new student orientation, and became an instrumental mentor for the students during their time here. She also ensured students had transportation to and from their individual assignments. Michelle helped periodically with feedback sessions from the students, which provided suggestions for future classes in the internship program. Michelle's effort helped create and support a new facet of our workplace culture. By building on our positive, respectful work environment, Michelle also created opportunities which offered valuable life lessons that will shape the leaders of tomorrow. Ultimately, her efforts outside the scope of her standard work directly tie into the contribution of our strategic goals as a district. For that, we commend her. Thank you, Michelle, for going the extra mile. At this time, I'd like to call Michelle up to the front to receive her award. All right, let's bring the board members out.
Can I actually have you guys take one step forward and we'll just push everybody in there? All right. Can you drop the check 6 inches? There you go, because I can't see everybody's faces.
Handshake? Oh, nope. Handshake. There you go. Oh, my apologies. All right. All right. Let's see. Thank you, Michelle. All right. Now moving on to the financial discussions of the day. First to the contract. As I previously mentioned, we are moving forward with efforts to bolster transparency across the district. Today, our board publicly examined a contract for the district as a direct result of our new procurement policy. This public examination allowed for everyone to review the business of the district in the sunshine. Under our guidelines, the contracts authorized exceeded the dollar amount that I can approve as administrator. As such, we brought them before the board for approval. I want to thank the board and our procurement staff for diligently completing these contracts. We're also in the process of advancing our buy local agenda, opening new opportunities to local vendors and veteran-owned vendors, and encouraging them to apply. I hope to have a more robust update of the progress of these projects in our October board meeting. The second element of extensive financial discussion, I want to alert the board and the public that the second union contract negotiation is underway. Our Chief of Staff, Paula Hoisington, and CFO, Susan Hickenbaum, have begun contract negotiation for our B unit. They have met on September the 19th and 20th. Negotiations are progressing smoothly, with temporary agreements reached on roughly 25 articles. We will resume talks on October 6th. The B unit current contract expires on December the 31st. I am confident that we'll be able to complete this negotiation before the deadline. I appreciate everyone's diligence to ensure that we achieve this goal. And last, we have a couple more things. Okay, so now moving on to our reports from our partners, Prague. At this time, I would like to call up Wendell Gardner, Senior Managing Director of Prague, to provide an overview of the Ralph Tillis project. Following Mr. Gardner's presentation, Mr. Terry Boveri, the Vice President of Ralph Tillis, will come up and share a report on the utility rate study. Mr. Gardner, you are recognized.
Thank you. Later this evening, the board will be presented with and asked to approve the utility budget for fiscal year 2024 that will include the setting of rates. And I know that you understand this or know this, but I just thought it'd be helpful to highlight a couple points to consider. First, the district owns and operates a complicated utility that provides multiple utility services. After the next debt service payment next week, the district will have $139 million of debt outstanding secured only by the net revenues of the utility system. The board has an obligation under that trust indenture to set rates that are sufficient to operate and maintain the system, fund all reserves, and pay debt service. The board also has an obligation under the trust indenture to adopt a budget annually by the end of the fiscal year for the upcoming fiscal year, which is what you'll be doing this evening. Under the trust indenture, the utility is a closed system. And we've said that before, that it means all of the revenues of the utility system have to remain in the benefit of the system. They can't be used for any other general fund purpose. And finally, pursuant to the Labor Services Agreement, the operations of the utility, including budgeting, is the responsibility of Reedy Creek Energy Services, or RCES, a wholly owned affiliate of the Walt Disney World Company. Because of this unique structure, early in our engagement, we recommended that the district engage a utility rate consultant to review RCES's procedures and policies as they develop the budget for you. We made this recommendation to provide you, the board, and staff a level of comfort that's in meeting its legal obligations under the trust indenture. And their work should also provide comfort to the users of the utility. Under the terms of the trust indenture, the district is required to engage a consulting engineer to produce an annual report at the end of the fiscal year, reviewing the operations, maintenance, and performance of the district. Those reports are prepared by the engineering firm Leidos, are a historical review. Leidos' reports can be considered a report card. For fiscal year 2022, the most recent, their report stated, "Nothing has come to our attention during the period that the district has failed in any material way to perform or comply with the covenants and agreements containing the indenture and the bond resolution." Ralph Tillis' focus is really on the practices and procedures used to develop the upcoming budget. You'll hear the report next, and I want to stress again that their analysis really focuses on reasonableness. There's no perfect budget, especially for a utility, with significant amount of fixed costs, and variable costs will be impacted by demand and consumption throughout the year. Last month, you heard Ralph Tillis' report on the reasonableness of the Labor Services Agreement, which is a significant component of the budget. And today's presentation will take that analysis a step further. After Ralph Tillis' report, you'll hear the details of the proposed utility budget by RCES. And some final thoughts to keep in mind. First, you have flexibility. Unlike the millage setting that you do for your general fund budget, you have the opportunity to amend the utility budget during the year as conditions change, and that has happened frequently in the past. Second, you do have to consider the future as part of this year's budget. Part of your obligation to bondholders is to maintain the system so that it can continue to generate revenues to provide high-quality service and pay debt service. Utilities are capital intensive, and historically the utilities borrowed money every few years, 3 to 5 years on average, most recently in 2018 and 2021. The budget that you'll be presented does contemplate a bond issue later this year. Given the aging of the utilities assets, the potential need for debt doesn't appear unreasonable, but you're not being asked at this time to approve any borrowing. Any borrowing would happen later in the year and would be presented once staff has reviewed it, we've reviewed it, the project costs and debt structure are finalized and presented for you. Approving this budget does not obligate you to approve any debt. And finally, I want to stress that Prague participated in Ralph Tillis' review. We reviewed the major documentation, we participated in meetings with Ralph Tillis staff and RCS, and we discussed the findings with Ralph Tillis and with staff. We agree with Ralph Tillis' findings and their recommendations for future enhancements, and we recommend adoption of the proposed budget. I will be available to address any questions. Terry?
Good evening. Thank you, Wendell. Members of the board. For the record, my name is Terry Bovary with Reftalis. Here with me this evening is Amanda Gucci, who led our work on the electric and natural gas evaluations of the system. I have a bridge presentation that touches on the key findings of the evaluation. Details of our analysis is included in our report, which hopefully was included in your package. Just a little bit about our firm. We're about 160 consultants around the country, and we pride ourselves on being one of the largest firms that practice in the specialized area of utility financial management consultation. Next slide, please. So the key objectives included 6 elements that fall under overall general element, which was to provide utility rate consulting services to evaluate the reasonableness of utility operations and finances. I'll talk a little bit about our approach in the next slide on how we approach that. The second objective and the third objective combined together, overview of the rates and financial planning for RCS as it relates to the district, followed by the review of the power purchase agreement, which is still currently ongoing, as will be mentioned, and finally the labor services agreement, which our findings on that were previously presented last month, as Mr. Gardner mentioned. Next slide, please. So our approach in the evaluation of this study was to do a desktop review of all relevant documentation. Mr. Gardner touched on several of those elements, including the trust indenture, labor services agreement. We worked with district staff and RCS staff to identify any relevant policies as they relate to business operations. We reviewed the engineering reports, as mentioned, the LIDOS report that's done annually with an on-site review every 3 years. I believe the last on-site review system condition assessment was performed in 2021. And we also examined continued disclosure files reported to the rating agencies and disclosure for the bondholders, as well as financial statements. And we performed some desktop evaluations of the financial conditions. And I'll mention in a moment, but as Mr. Gardner said, that there's a pretty substantial amount of need for capital reinvestment identified in the capital improvement plan over the next years. Probably going to require some issuance of debt. Everything generally seemed reasonable from our perspective, and one of the elements in our report that we highlighted in the systems overview was that the current investment in utility infrastructure, about 70% is accumulated depreciation at this point. So significant amount of utility infrastructure is approaching or reaching its service life and will require reinvestment. And so the capital improvement plan, I think that's been identified to support that, and maybe touched on a little bit in the budget process. So that was just one element of some of the work that we did in kind of more detail to kind of validate and look at the reasonableness of the budget and what was being proposed. Another element to our evaluation beyond just a simple desktop evaluation and documentation was to do some benchmarking. Benchmarking included review of rates, the comparability of those rates. We performed our own benchmarking in addition to the benchmarking that RCS does through their LIDOS and engineering consultants. And while we generally surveyed similar entities, the end result was comparable, that generally was reasonable. And finally, the last aspect of our evaluation were staff interviews, multiple staff reviews going over the annual AOP model, annual planning model, and long-term planning model to assess its reasonableness and approach, which I'll touch on in a second. Next slide. So one of the things we talked about when we developed this report with staff was trying to provide an overview of the differences between some terminology in our industry, cost of service, revenue sufficiency, what's sort of the difference between those things. And I think that the easiest way to think about this is revenue sufficiency is more like your budget process. Do we have enough money coming in to balance against the money going out? Do we have enough cash in the bank? And the utility operations, as Mr. Carter mentioned, are complex, and there are over 8 different utility services, which on the next slide will present an overview of the revenues. And so it's operated as one fund, and the biggest element that we need to make sure is, do we have enough funds to continue operation? And we balance our rate revenues against our operating costs, our debt service, and our planned work and capital reinvestment. The other element, once we figure out the overall rate revenue system needs for the utility operations is a cost of service evaluation. This is where we're allocating the cost to the different utility operations. In most cases, when RCS staff puts together their strategic plans on this, annual strategic plans, they've already identified what those costs are and have separate accounting, and the district has separate accounting for each one of the utility operations. And then that forms a foundation for the individual system adjustments. And the cost of service aspect takes that a little bit of a step further and then allocates those costs to the various rate components and customer classes within the system. That is an analysis that's typically performed less frequently. So whereas the revenue sufficiency to evaluate whether we have sufficient revenues to cover our costs and adjusting our rates wholesale in that regard would be done annually, cost of service may be done less frequently, 3 to 5 years, sometimes 10 years. Usually there's a trigger mechanism for why you would want to look at that if you have a significant change in your operations, you're issuing a lot of debt, things of that nature. So RCS and the district have in the past performed the revenue sufficiency task on an annual basis. Currently, cost of service is being done on the solid waste system. And I believe in talking with RCS staff, there's intentions or plans over the next several years to attack cost of service on other aspects of the utility operations to maintain the reasonableness of the rates. So, as I mentioned before, the district operates 8 utility services as an enterprise fund, and similar in concept to the closed fund. The utilities must generate all the revenue to fund operations from the service fees themselves. Hence, why we need to adjust the rates annually to ensure sufficient revenues to cover cost of service. I apologize, the font's a bit small with the table, but this was just to demonstrate over the last several years from the continuing disclosure report the annual amounts of revenue generated for each one of the systems in operation under the purview of the district. As you can see, the electric system represents about 56% of the total revenue. It's the majority, followed by the wastewater system and the chilled water system. The customer base for the utility, unlike many of the other studies we tend to do studies with, is predominantly commercial. Many times when we perform these studies, the residential mix is a greater representation. But in this particular case, this is effectively a commercial business operation. And the other point to mention is that of the services provided, the chilled and hot water services are primarily for the Walt Disney Company and its affiliates. As a consequence of that, and I think as mentioned before, 82% of the revenues that are generated for the utility services are derived from Walt Disney and its affiliates. As far as Objective 1, as I mentioned before, that's a general overview, and I touched a little bit about the capital reinvestment, looking at the audited financial statements and gleaning some details of the system operations with the consulting engineers report as well. This was where we determined that generally it seemed like the utility is being operated in an economic, efficient manner and reasonable. That was one of the main findings of the consulting engineers report from 2022. The other key finding for us was that the utility continues to operate or maintain a high investment grade credit rating with the major credit rating agencies, Moody's, Fitch, S&P. I'm already touched on point 3, given the age of the infrastructure, recent trends, that the CIP appears reasonable. And as mentioned, the rates for service are very competitive within the region based on our benchmarking comparisons. And then the last point, and just wanted to kind of touch on this, that we really appreciate RCS and their staff and the district staff in their assistance that they provided us through the engagement. They were very professional, and it demonstrates their skill and capability. And in our report, we document some of the years of experience of the key leaders of the RCS utility staff responsible for the utility operations, and at least half of them are 30 years or more, and many of them are at 20 years in their first year of leading their respective managerial roles within those utility functions. So very strong management team, and in addition to that, as we presented, during the labor services discussion that many of the staff that's hired at the frontline worker level are also experienced staff members. They don't hire brand new folks that don't have a lot of experience. Everybody's generally very experienced at all levels of the operation. So objectives 2 and 3, you can see there written out, relate to evaluate the reasonableness of the financial planning and the rates. And as I mentioned before, the way that we did that was to do our desktop review of all the relevant documentation, but we also had an opportunity, as I mentioned before, to sit down with staff and review their financial models that they use to develop. And the process that they go through is generally consistent with procedures that we see employed through the development of financial planning for other utilities. There are going to be differences because of the unique characteristics of this utility operation. As I mentioned before, the commercial aspect of that, with the electric rates too being the number one element, you can sometimes see fluctuations and the need to adjust rates because fuel costs are fairly volatile, and so we need to adjust the rates. So, but if you look over the last several years, since 2019, the utility rate increases have generally been inflationary in nature. There was a need to bump them up a little bit higher in a few years during the COVID when there was a pullback in demand in the system when we evaluated, and then there was a corresponding reduction more recently in those rates. And I believe for fiscal year 2024, the rates are being, on average, generally held constant. Now, within the individual systems themselves, there are some adjustments being made, notably within the solid waste system rates, as will be presented in the budget and some of the drivers for those cost increases. But again, overall, revenue is generally consistent from 2023 to 2024. So the other element of our analysis, now that we've touched on sort of our review and what we've done, is one of the key findings was that it's recommended that the district evaluate the feasibility of either establishing a separate fund by utility service or performing true-ups at the close of each fiscal year. Because it was a one-fund system, if you don't do these true-ups at the end of the year, you can build up some differences among the different utility systems. I don't know if it's very feasible to set up separate funds, and the district already has separate accounting for the utilities, so probably a true up would be sufficient, performed at the end of the year to ensure the reasonableness of the rates is factored in year over year. But generally speaking, we didn't find anything that was a major concern. This was just a recommendation. The other element, kind of in a similar vein to that, item 3 on our recommendations for objective 2 and 3, is to recommend that the district do a true up to the debt service allocation after debt proceeds are spent for each debt issue. Based on our discussions with our CES staff, and debt isn't always issued. We may refinance debt, but new debt isn't always issued every year. But when it does happen, there's an assumption about how we're going to spend that money for the capital needs of the system. And they're estimates at that point. And so if we're funding multiple projects from different utility systems, basically our recommendation is just go back and review that at the close of the construction of the project, maybe 2-3 years after all the proceeds are spent and the projects are done, and ensure that the allocation of that debt service among the systems is consistent with how the proceeds were spent. And then the final recommendation, as I mentioned before, it's fairly customary to look at the cost of service for each one of the utility systems periodically. There is no science behind a 3 to 5 year recommendation or even a 5 to 10 year recommendation. I think that the most important thing is to evaluate it on an as needed basis. Once you set the cost of service, you set the rate components, the cost recovery among the systems, evaluating it periodically is always a good thing. But the main trigger should be, do we have a change in operations? Has there been material changes in our cost structure? Things of those natures you could think of as trigger mechanisms for the need to do that. And I think that RCS recognize that. As I mentioned earlier, the rates overall aren't going up that much across the board, but you'll find that the solid waste system needs to adjust based on the cost of service there fairly substantially. And I think that is something where that sort of was a trigger mechanism to want to have RCS look at that cost of service, and hence why they're looking at that now, as an example. So the next objective that we touched on was examining the power purchase agreement, and that included a review of all of the different power generating infrastructure and agreements, and that evaluation is still currently under review. We're fairly far along, near completion on that, and we expect to be complete by next month and can provide a report on that. But nothing has come to our attention at this time that would cause any concern related to that objective and analysis. And then finally, objectives 5 and 6, I've already been before the board to present on these at the August 23rd meeting, and it was in response to the discussion about the labor services agreement, which we effectively concluded was generally reasonable. And the key elements of that, and I already touched on these points earlier, that RCS hires experienced staff. There was a need to do some adjustments for some based on some of the benchmarking for the electric frontline professionals. The proposed increase was generally reasonable, and market and economic trends support the salary actions that were proposed and subsequently approved by the board. And with that, I would like to open it up for any questions you may have at this time.
Any questions from my fellow board members?
I guess one question I guess I might ask, I mean, obviously the last few years we've seen sort of unprecedented, or at least in the last several decades, unprecedented cost increases, rates of inflation. I mean, to what extent, when you talk about reassessing our agreements every 5 to 10 years, do we think about sort of the unprecedented sort of times that we're in on that front?
Well, I think what based on our discussions with the staff and review of the financial planning, what happened was a pretty significant drop in demand, and that's what drove the need to adjust the rates. I believe that the inflation in the cost that's been observed has been perhaps somewhat acute in certain areas of the operation. When we think about the electric, you have the fuel costs that increase and decrease, and those were adjusted for accordingly. So I think that through the annual planning process, that can capture a lot of that, the overall cost. I think the issue is if the relationship of the underlying costs changed overall. And I think that when we looked at when we think about the solid waste operations as a key area where it would be good to look at the cost service, and RCS is already doing that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have some questions. So if I understand what your presentation, we've got some capital expense requirements
Yes, sir.
that are coming up. Give me a perspective of what the timeline is for that and the process that's followed for the board to evaluate any CapEx proposals, and then the funding of them, what the alternatives and options are.
Well, I'll give an opportunity to Mr. Gardner to touch on that as well. However, I think that through the budgetary process, through the planning process that we were privy to, the annual process looks at the budgetary, more of the operating needs. The long-term plan that's developed looks at the 5-year capital needs of the system, and that gets baked into that financial planning. It's really more a function of on an as-needed basis. Utilities are very capital intensive, and their life cycles are sporadic in terms of when you need to replace that. So, as I mentioned before, the district and RCS in particular employs a lot of planning studies and monitoring condition assessments of the infrastructure on an annual and regular basis. And I believe through those, and they can Ms. Farrar can probably speak to it better than I can too, and will probably do so in the budget presentation. But that work effort by professionals that serve to evaluate the infrastructure help guide the needs for the capital reinvestment in the system that then feed into that long-term planning model and the capital plan needs over the next 5 years. Once they've been identified, then there's the funding of that. And I believe that's where, Mr. Gardner steps in and assists in identifying the best and most fiscally efficient way to do that with the cost of capital and the needs of the system. And typically speaking, the decision about whether you issue debt, from our experience in doing these studies, is a function of, is this an asset that's really long-lived? How much cash reserves do we have? We want to maximize and spend down the use of cash reserves before we issue debt, and then we look to debt. In this particular operation, it's pretty tight, in terms of the cash reserves that we maintain. We're maintaining just what's required for working capital and unexpected allowances for reinvestment needs, maintenance, unplanned work, perhaps. And so these major capital needs, as they arise and as they've been identified through these planning processes, are incorporated to this 5-year plan, and financing is identified from there. And I don't know, Mr. Gardner, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, Wendell, my question is more directed towards process.
Sure.
Okay, and I understand that there's a CapEx budget and there's an operating budget, but I'm more interested from the board's perspective of what the process that's followed and what timeline that we're dealing with.
We are just starting that process now. As part of the budgeting process, RECS said we are identifying some capital needs. They have estimated a $20 million potential need, but they have not presented exactly what that is. So what we have done in the budget is you'll see a $500,000 increase in debt service, which equates to 6 months of $20 million, assuming a 5% tax exempt interest rate. So that gives a cushion in there that if the need for debt is needed at that level, it's within the budget. The process would be for them to then come and really show what they need, why they need it, does it add value, which part of the utility does it benefit, and then us as your advisor, staff, Raftels would look at that and would bring forward a recommendation as to whether or not it should be financed, how it should be done. How should it be financed? Should it be financed shorter term, longer term? Should we use debt? Should we use cash on hand? We're expecting that you're not going to hear much about the need for debt for another 5 to 6 months.
Okay, so the RCES generates their own internal budget, and then PRAG is going to evaluate the budget and make a recommendation to the board. Okay, and then so there's the approval of the budget process with PRAG's recommendation or blessing, and then the next question is what are the options on how to pay for it, and will we also get independent third party recommendation from PRAG on that issue as well?
Yes, we make recommendations upon the issuance of debt or not to issue debt as part of our fiduciary duty to you.
Okay, good, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm wondering if it was within the purview of PRAG to look at the hardening of our facilities.
That is something that we look at the financial aspects of that. It is something that a lot of utilities obviously look at for obvious reasons. It typically, whenever a utility is investing new capital, they are very cognizant of hardening. They are looking at everything that's necessary, whether it be elevation, whether it be strengthening, whether it be location, whether it be redundancy for that. That will automatically happen, I think, at this level. What hasn't been done is what would it cost to retrofit and go back, and we haven't looked at that yet.
Okay, and then one other question, and that seems a little boomy there. There you go. Okay, that relates to technology. All right, we're seeing now that we're on the cusp of significant advances with battery technology, companies like EOS and so on. And that should change, I would think, some of the financial considerations, particularly if we're looking at plans that are more than a couple of years. Okay, is that something that you've examined at this point? Is that something that you just see as just beyond the horizon? How do you see that?
That's something right now that is something we would be aware of. Obviously, that would have a major impact on your utility system. Right now, as the report had indicated, a lot of your utility comes from power purchase agreements. You're not generating your own utility directly. And the generating assets that you have right now, you're kind of keeping in reserve. I think before there would be any moving forward of capital regarding generation facilities, we would want to look at battery options and others. One of the things that we would expect to see in the near future, Raftels had talked about a cost of service study. the electric system is probably one that we would want to do in the next couple of years because of that shift that is happening from the generation through solar. And that is changing some of the cost basis, and that would be a trigger that we would look at. I think the look at new technology would be involved if we were looking at new generation facilities, which really isn't something that the district is looking at this point.
Thank you.
You know, Supervisor Perry's question raises an issue with me too. You know, we as a district are not really operating the utility operations. They're being done by an independent party, and we've brought in PRAG and the rate setting experts to come advise the board because we're not experts on utility business. Okay, and so. Typically in any business where you have technology, like Supervisor Perry's indicated, there's a strategic plan in terms of what the long-term objectives are. And is that something that PRAG is evaluating as to whether our CES has the appropriate, strategic plan in place and whether they're implementing the appropriate technology so that if we're allocating capital to something, it's not something that's going to become obsolete and those kinds of things?
That is part of what we're doing right now as part of our overarching analysis into the utilities. Obviously, our initial focus is how is it operating? Is it operating reasonably? What is the reasonable budget going forward? And then it's more of a strategic analysis of what is it going to look like? What changes might be necessary? Some of the things that Raftellus recommended we do think make sense. I think part of the analysis would also be, as Raftellus said, even though it's a combined system, how is each one standing and financing on its own? And to make sure that the ratepayers of one system are really paying for what they're using, and there's not a lot of bleed over. That's obviously a very complicated analysis that will take some time to do, but it's something that we're starting.
So I'm just curious, do you have other situations similar to ours where you have a board that has oversight responsibility over an independent operating utility operation that's really separate and independent from the oversight board?
We have some, and Raftellus can probably add a little bit more, that have some aspects that are more privatized and work through that. And some of that is in the solid waste. There are a number of our clients that have waste to energy facilities that are privately operated, and the board has oversight but not operations. A lot of our clients in the solid waste area contract for hauling, so they will set the contracts, but then the haulers are doing it themselves. The magnitude of what you've got here, your entire system, is a little bit different, and
so we have the utmost confidence in PRAG, but I just want to make sure that we as a board are following best practices on how we evaluate this budget that's going to be presented to us and our various options. And as Supervisor Perry says, make sure that there's a strategic plan in place for the utility that's in best practices. And I don't know what that process is because this is all new to us. And so we're going to rely upon PRAG to tell us with that process. And if the appropriate process requires a separate workshop on this issue, then we want to have a separate workshop, and we want to make sure that we cover all the bases and we ask all the questions. This is not something that we want to rubber stamp, and we want to be educated on it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is one of those pieces of the onion that when you unravel, this one was going to take a little longer. And so I think we're just starting on that process, and you guys are doing an excellent job and giving us great information. But I definitely think perhaps a work session in the October-November timeframe to talk strategic planning going forward on a going forward basis. One of the things that I'm interested in is enterprise funds. Many cities have those. Many counties have those for gas companies, for example, that provide services outside of their own jurisdiction. I have no idea if that's feasible here. I have no idea if that's something that we could do, but I want to be holistic in our approach to this and our understanding of it. And so I don't expect you to have some kind of response to that, but add it to your list of things to think about, please, and
Sure.
look at what other jurisdictions are doing across the state. And I'm sure you're all experts on that. So thank you.
And just to follow up, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but we want to be spoon fed. We want to make sure that we look at everything, follow the most appropriate process, and are very transparent and have all the information. And if we have to spend a half day at a workshop doing this, we're willing to do that.
And I think that would be helpful. I think understanding kind of the history of because it is your utility, but you also are impacted by the agreements you have with all of the surrounding areas. I do want to point out that when we were engaged, and almost as soon as we saw the kind of the structure and labor service agreement, we thought that this is something that is so detailed. We wanted to bring Raftellus in or somebody like them, and I appreciate that the board followed that direction. Thank you.
And it might be helpful, can you present to Mr. Gilzine a timeline in terms of when we have to make what decisions so that we're not rushed on this?
Definitely.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions or comment on this subject?
All right. Next, I'd like to call up Chris Ferraro, Director of RCES, who will provide a presentation from our Utilities Division about their annual budgets and rates. Chris, come forward, please.
Thank you, Mr. Gilzine. Good evening, Mr. Gilzine again, and members of the board. I am Christine Ferraro. I'm the Director of Reedy Creek Energy Services, and I really appreciate Terry calling out my 30-plus years of utility experience. Thank you so much, Terry, for providing that information to the team. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to share our proposed fiscal year 24 Central Florida Tourism Oversight District utility rate budget and utility rate recommendations. So our first slide, as Terry described, the first part of our process is to identify cost in the upcoming fiscal year. For fiscal year 24, utility costs are expected to be $192 million, which is a decrease of $1.3 million or 0.7% from the fiscal year 23 budget. In the pie chart, you'll see that there are 5 major components of utility costs. We'll start with the largest component of those costs. I think Wendell spoke about this, as did Terry. Our purchase power and fuel represents 41% of our budget. It's represented by the darker blue color on the pie chart. Wonderful news in this area of the budget. Through the district's enterprise risk management program that provides for hedging agreements for purchases of natural gas going forward. The district is 84% hedged for the required volumes of natural gas for fiscal year 24, and the weighted cost of that gas is $3.39 per MMBTU for fiscal year 24. So it's a pretty significant savings that creates the opportunity for to provide some of the other inflationary uplifts in the utility budget. Labor support has 2 sources. Labor support is the next largest component in purple on the pie chart at 18.7% of the utility budget. In fiscal year 24, labor support is increasing $2.5 million or 7.6%. 2 pieces of that labor support. The first is the RCS Labor Services Agreement, previously approved by the board, for $34.5 million. That $34.5 million was a $1.9 million increase over fiscal year 23, and it was a 5.7% increase. Another key component of the utility budget is support from the beautiful and lovely and capable district admin team, where we have support on finance, facilities, contracting, and procurement. That amount is $1.5 million. Operating expenses, as we talked about, inflationary cost increases are increasing at an unprecedented rate for fiscal year 24 in the utility business. There is a $6.2 million increase, and it's a 21% increase for this year. $5.1 million of that increase is related to routine operating expenses, primarily driven by inflationary cost and contract increases for fleet, labor, and parts, hauling disposal costs, and chemical cost increases. The other $1.6 million of that operating expense increase is for planned work expense projects. Planned work expense projects support overhauls of equipment and also unplanned emergencies. That's an increase in cost in that planned work category. We looked at the historical trends and found that we needed some more space in that and more headroom in that budget and wanted to include it in the annual rates. As Wendell mentioned, debt service reserve increases $500,000 in fiscal year 24 related to a partial year payment of debt service for a proposed $50 million in borrowing. Again, that's at the district's consideration and discretion, included in the budget here, just so we have rate adequacy to cover that when the board approves that decision to move forward. For clarity, we have identified 9 separate projects and uses for that $50 million, and it's a number of items across utilities. And we'll continue to partner with PRAG on what that looks like for your information. Capital reserve requirements are increasing $1.1 million, or 8.7%. This category is a combination of 2 things. It's our planned work capital budget. So there are 2 ways the utility spends capital dollars. Some of those are through financing, and some of them are recovered through rates on it and included in the annual budget. Of that $13.9 million, $13 million is capital for refurbishment of the district assets, including district facilities, buildings, fleet, and then it's also specific projects that renew operating assets of the utility system. There's a $500,000 increase planned in fiscal year 24 for our reserve requirements, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get to the income statement. There's a note here that mentions items that are excluded from this list. There are net neutral budget items that are not included in this list that we'll go through in the income statement. They include 2 things. It includes uses of pre-collected or utility reserve funds. They would be withdrawn from reserves, and then they don't impact the current utility rate, and we'll talk about that more in the income statement. And we also have neutral costs where we have sales between utilities. So the district does operate 8 separate utilities, and an example of a sale between them would be the use of electricity at the wastewater treatment plant. We have large pumps and systems that utilize electricity heavily, and the electric utility effectively sells to the wastewater utility. So it kind of nets out, so we pull that out of the budget. Did I get that right, Susan? You're nodding your head. Perfect. All right. After we talk about utility cost, as Wendell and Terry alluded, then we start talking about revenue adequacy, right? Because the utilities need to come to zero, and we need to cover all of our costs through revenue. So there's a breakdown of the revenue as expected in fiscal year 24 by utility provided in the pie chart. In fiscal year 24, the electric utility is still the big dog, bringing in utility dollars at 49%. This warms my heart. I am an electrical engineer by trade, and this just makes me so happy that that's our largest utility. Sorry about that, Terry, but the electric utility is at 49%. I'd like to draw your attention in the table on the left to the 2 utilities that have dollar percent decreases in fiscal year 24, particularly electric and gas. That's really that result of those lower commodity prices and the district's very effective risk hedging program for gas purchases. Next slide. Finally, our rate recommendation, as has been previously described, pretty much flat, but it is a decrease overall for all utilities of 0.8% recommended from fiscal year 23 to 24, a little bit of a decrease. And there are separate rate adjustments for each utility that are described on the bottom of the page. When we think about utility rates, we also think about sales, and we do have some forecast sales increases in utilities that benefit utility rates. We're looking for increased consumption in the electric utility, the chilled water utility, and in our reclaimed water system. So the rates also benefit from additional sales. The next 6 slides talk specifically a little bit more about each of the utility and the variation in rates, the contribution of that utility to the overall revenue of the system, and then there's a cost comparison provided on the right-hand side from a rate comparison for our neighboring utilities. So we'll begin with electric. The electric utility is proposing an 8.1% reduction in cost, primarily driven by those lower commodity prices and the increase in consumption and sales. And again, the electric utility is 49% of the revenue base. Just orienting us a little bit to the graphic on the right, this is a cost comparison starting from left to right. The blue bar is the fiscal year 23 utility rates, and the green bar is the proposed rate in fiscal year 24. The 2 bars on the far right are neighboring utilities, and that's a cost comparison from January of 2023 performed by the district's external vendor, Leidos. That kind of puts us on an apples to apples basis with our surrounding utility neighbors. So as you can see, we're kind of anchoring that back. We have a blank line that anchors that back to fiscal year 23 because that information is kind of about a year old now. So when you look at that comparison, that's where we're at. From an electric utility perspective, our rates are very competitive and below our neighbors. And I'd really like to just emphasize as we look at these rates, you know, we talked about, there were some questions about hardening and system redundancy. The electric utility here is about 98% underground. We are a source of comfort and evacuation as we have impacts on both of our coast. A lot of people come to the district from across Florida, and we pride ourselves in keeping those lights on and we keeping people safe during hurricanes. So our system is very robust, very resilient, and with the underground nature and the forward thinking of the design and construction, some of that hardening is baked in. So I'm very happy to say, and we do it at a very cost-effective price. Next slide. Natural gas system also rates expected lower in fiscal year 24 due to commodity cost decreases. Natural gas system is 7% of the overall utility revenue base. You can see the cost comparisons for fiscal year 23 and 24 to some of our surrounding neighbors there, a favorable rate structure here at the district. Next slide. Solid waste, I appreciate Terry kind of laying ground for this conversation. Solid waste in the last, probably since COVID, has been very impacted by inflationary uplift. This is very connected to hauling and disposal cost that is very heavily linked to fuel and labor, right? We collect everything on behalf of the district, but it needs to be transported to the disposal locations. So as those uplifts have come in that labor and that CDL, driver charge, the disposal costs have increased significantly in solid waste, such that we began, I have two of my colleagues here today, Brian Aboud and Lisa Mears, and they started a study of our solid waste costs because we are anticipating a 43% increase this year. And that revenue right now is attributed to our Class 1 and Class 3 waste collection. The district also has a robust recycling collection program and is very environmentally minded. And we need to look at what those costs are and how we allocate those costs among those classes, yet still encourage the environmental benefit where it makes sense and it's fiscally responsible. The solid waste revenues are 9% of the utility revenue base. As you can see, the fiscal year 23 rates in solid waste were favorable compared to our neighbors. You definitely can see the big cost increase coming in fiscal year 24. In conversations with Terry and others, it looks like this is an impact to the entirety of the industry. But we'll look for how we benchmark in fiscal year 24. We'll also complete our cost of service study and make sure that we're aligning that revenue to where those expenses are coming in. Water and sewer is bundled together, and they are together having a 13% rate increase. Really driven by those higher chemical costs. We also have a beneficial reuse of all of the biosolids from our wastewater treatment plant. It sounds really fancy. It's not that fancy of an experience in person if you'd ever like to come see it. But we do have a beneficial reuse, and they go to a composting facility that does a great job getting them to like a Class AA that actually can be land applied for fertilizer. But those costs have been increasing, and the chemical costs are increasing significantly as well. Water sales are 4% of the overall revenue, and the sewer sales are 15% of the overall revenue. Rate comparisons, again, even with that uplift in rates, still comparing favorably to our neighbors. For the next three utilities, we do not have a benchmark for our neighboring utilities. It was not presented historically in the Leidos comparison. We did contact them and ask them if they could do something so that we could speak to that today at the board. They were not prepared to meet that timeline. It's quite a structured process to do this comparison. We will make sure that that district has that information in the next fiscal year. So you'll see just a comparison of fiscal year 23 to 24 for the next three utilities. Reclaimed water is a very small part of the utility revenue structure. It accounts for 1% of all utility sales. There is an expected increase in use for reclaimed water, which drives up a little bit in the decrease in the current rates. It's so sensitive, it's so small, it's sensitive to those additional sales. Across the district, reclaimed water is used for irrigation, for cooling tower makeup in our chiller plants. And it also has limited restroom usage, just specifically toilet flushing. All the uses are within the Epcot building code. Chilled water and hot water rates. So our chilled water rate is going up 1.3%, and our hot water rate is decreasing 6.9%. Chilled water rates are impacted and driven higher based on some significant overhauls we're doing in the energy plants. So the chillers in our energy plants are 2,000 tons. So if you think of a typical unit at your house, right, 5 tons, we're at 2,000 tons, and those overhauls are part of required maintenance within the life cycle of the unit, but they are very costly. So there's an increase in rates driven by those projects. Hot water is derived from natural gas, and it benefits from the lower commodity costs associated with that heat generation. There is an increase in chilled water sales expected also in fiscal year 24. So many parts of this overall income statement have already been discussed, so I'll kind of just go quickly by line item and welcome any questions about further details. But this is our overall income statement comparing fiscal year 23 to the proposal for fiscal year 24. As we said before, we're aligning our expenses and our revenue, both at $192 million, netting us to zero on the utility budget. Lines 3 and 4 are net neutral items to the budget. Interdepartment utility sales are significant. You can see it's expected to be $16.5 million. Among other uses of electricity, the chilled water service here has electric-driven chillers that are also energy consumptive. So there are multiple sales across utilities, and a lot of processes use water, and we have a lot of uses across our systems. There is a proposal to withdraw $6.9 million from the utility reserve or pre-collected funds. A couple of primary uses for that funding is proposed. We're proposing $1.7 million as a one-time payment to our disposer of food waste collected from around the property. Food waste is a tremendous commodity to collect, also becomes fertilizer, but when people dispose of food waste, they also sometimes throw in forks, knives, spoons, and other things like that. So our vendor needs to install some equipment to make sure that that contamination doesn't become part of those compost rows. We have some other utility equipment to be decommissioned that's proposed for uses. Typically, the uses in our pre-collected funds are one-time expenses that we don't expect to continue. We want to make sure that anything that continues as a utility expense is provided for in base rates and not from a reserve. There's $2.5 million of that $6.9 million also as a to be determined in case there's a significant utility event or emergency that needs to be supported and funded. The expense items on lines 5, 6, and 7 have already been discussed. That's the purchase power and fuel and our $11.7 million decrease, the $2.5 million increase in labor, and the routine expenses going up $5.1 million. Landfill fees are flat from fiscal year 23 to 24. I expect that next month you'll see a contract for a rebidding of those landfill fees and services. We had a significant uplift request from our vendors on a CPI clause and partnered with the district procurement team and had a successful rebid of that contract that enabled us to manage those costs and keep that line item flat. Gross receipts tax just follows revenue, and there's a little decrease of $0.3 million. Our planned work expense we spoke about is $3.1 million, a $1.6 million increase, accounting for those alignment to the historical spend. Insurance is actually a hard bid, and I'm very proud of this in our current day and age that we're going down a little bit. We're going down $100,000 in our insurance costs for fiscal 24. Line 12 nets against line 3, and that's our interdepartment utility use. We show it as revenue, and we subtract it as expense across the individual utility systems. Moving into fund requirements, debt service has been discussed. That's the increase for potential additional financing of $500,000 in fiscal year 24, again at the board's additional approval and discretion. Renewal and replacement capital that's recovered through rates is about $13 million per year. If we would acquire additional funds, that incremental capital spending could be financed, but we'll work forward, look for guidance on how we would pay for those additional projects. Cash flow increases slightly. We want to make sure that the utility has a sufficient cash flow for 60-day operating reserves and then a little bit above that. Use of pre-collected funds is the $6.9 million that we spoke about under line item number 4. They reverse each other and come to zero. The final line item number 17 in our income statement, it talks about the debt services coverage. I think Wendell talked about this a little bit. One of the key metrics that we look for as part of our bond covenants is that we make sure that that adjusted revenue and expense as a ratio to our debt service is at least 1.2. But right now, we're sitting at a little bit of an increase, 1.51 for fiscal year 24, indicating that the reserves are increasing. And that helps the utility division keep a strong credit rating and borrowing aspect. So that concludes the presentation. A lot of information. I welcome any questions.
Any questions from my fellow directors? Yes.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for that detailed presentation. As I said earlier, I am just starting to get into this in detail, and so I really look forward to learning more about it and understanding it better going forward, and hopefully at perhaps a work session coming up. So I appreciate this information. Do our rates have to be approved by the Public Service Commission?
No, sir. Under the district's charter, the rates are approved by the Board of Supervisors.
And that's under the active legislation. Is that right?
I probably stepped over into
That's
Wendell's
okay, no
territory.
problem.
Yeah,
and that may be something we look into.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. I don't have the language here with me.
Okay, so there's no regulation of the Public Service Commission over the district?
They have no regulation over municipal utility authorities, and you're considered a municipal utility authority.
Okay. Do we provide any services to customers that are not taxpayers of the district?
So at the current time, we have some wholesale agreements with neighboring utilities that were provided as interim agreements until like Orange County could provide facilities to an area. They have sunset and they end at triggers when our adjacent utilities have their facilities constructed. They'll take that service from the district at that time, but that's the exception right now.
And are those all included in the projected sales in the budget?
Correct. Yes, they're designed at kind of a wholesale rate, and that rate recovers all of the fixed and variable costs of the utility.
Do we have the capacity to provide services to customers outside of the district?
I can speak from the operations of the system. There's capacity in the systems. I would have to partner to understand what all of the rules and regulations would be that would apply to that.
Okay, that's something I'd like to have on the list, particularly in the enterprise fund discussion. And then recycling. I know some jurisdictions have struggled mightily with actually recycling their recycled materials. Do we recycle 100% of the material collected within the district at a proper facility, or is any of that mixed in with landfill, sanitation, or regular trash?
So great question. As a district, we really like to keep a track of where that end product is disposed of. I have visited personally the facilities that we contract with that sort and dispose of those recycled materials. There have been issues in some of the plastic commodities in particular, I think 3 through 8, right, where there hasn't generally been a market. I am happy to report that that market is returning. And we got a check last month from our vendor that the district came into the money last month with a check from our recycler and for the commodities. So it is a commodity market. It kind of comes and goes, but right now we are on an upswing.
Okay, and finally, I'm just trying to understand the relationship between RCES and the district, and probably will understand it better after the work session. But does RCES provide services for anybody other than the district? Any other entities or any other customers or any other utilities? Do they operate anything outside of what they're doing for us?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions, comments from my fellow directors?
Mr. Chair, I've got a couple questions. First of all, ma'am, congratulations on 30 years of service. I assume that means you were a child prodigy. Thank you.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you and really compliment you about the what seems like a very extraordinarily successful fuel cost hedging program, and it seems like probably some other utilities and maybe some airlines could learn from what you all do, and I wonder if you might shine a little bit of light on that success.
Certainly. And first, I'd like to tilt my hat to my peer in the business, Ray Crox. He's not here today, but he leads that side of the utility business for the district. So it's effectively a 5-year program where we forecast the needs of the natural gas for the utility, and we have partners that are into the market, and our folks are into the market daily, kind of watching the NYMEX, and we also have forecasting out into the future. And it's a dollar cost averaging approach to natural gas purchases. So we're not trying to go into the market at one time. We know the market is volatile. If you fill your gas tank, you know that some days you're up and some days you're down. So our approach really takes that monitoring, and we go in small tranches. We'll purchase 5% or 10% in the next 5 fiscal years so that we get that really great blended cost. And in the market, sometimes you win when the commodity cost is trending up, and then sometimes that stability, you may be right at market, but it definitely takes that volatility and that exposure from the district.
Can you touch on solar?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Gazine. So I am also happy to announce that the district has entered into a third power purchase agreement with a 75 megawatt solar facility in Gilchrist County, a partnership with a subsidiary of NextEra Energy. It is the third district solar array, and it is I think we're up to about 25% of the energy supply portfolio from that renewable resource, and really need to honor my peer that the price that they negotiated in that power purchase agreement is very favorable. It's probably more favorable than some of the other fossil fuel resources.
Great. One question about rates. It sounds like our rates are pretty well in line, reasonable sort of within the industry, but it seemed like somewhat below the neighboring utilities. And I guess I wonder if you could sort of talk about that rationale a little bit more to the extent you can, and whether that's sort of in line with sort of historic rates by the utility.
Terry, do you want to take that, or I can take my shot at it? So some of that comes from the fact that the district's customers are primarily commercial. A lot of that has to do with the investments in the infrastructure early on. A lot of the expansions in sales have been within the capacity of the utility, so we don't have to spend district capital funds to recognize those additional sales and revenue. Any color you would add, Terry?
Yeah, I think I would just add too that the process that we observe through the annual planning process to adjust the rates as needed, if that's been done historically, that's not something that utilities always necessarily do because of the sometimes political nature of adjusting rates, specifically as it relates to the residential service, as you can imagine. And therefore, adjusting the rates as needed can keep you at a lower cost overall if you're not deferring maintenance, things of that nature.
Okay. Thank you. Last question. I noticed it seems like the solid waste costs were moving up significantly, and I've heard, and again I'm learning here, so feel free to educate me. It seems like there's a lot of some innovative uses of solid waste, particularly sort of in maybe converting into natural gas. Is there any kind of what is that? What would that look like? Is that something we've considered within the district?
So the district has considered that before. We had a partnership with an external entity, Harvest Power Orlando LLC, a very effective partnership while in place. Unfortunately, they became financially insolvent in 2020. They were, up till that time, handling the disposal of district food waste and biosolids. But the facility did not turn out to be cost effective, and now the district is managing those waste streams independently.
Okay,
but we're open to additional partnerships.
Great. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the board? I have some questions. It's process related. So it's understand Terry and Wendell's presentation, you're recommending to the board that we approve this budget, okay? And of course, we're relying on you all because we don't have any expertise in this area. But just for future purposes, from a board governance policy perspective, I think it really would be appropriate when we get something that's this comprehensive, that the board be provided to us in advance. And this was not part of our material. And of course, we brought in Terry and Wendell's firm because you all are experts in this and we're going to be deferential to you all. But I find it a little disrespectful that something this comprehensive gets presented to us at a meeting through a PowerPoint presentation. So in the future, please make sure that these types of budgets and something this comprehensive is provided to the board in advance. Okay?
Yes, sir.
I have no further questions.
Okay. Now we'll move on to the board's budget, the district's budget. I'm very proud of the budget product that we've been able to deliver on behalf of our taxpayers, guests, and even employees. I would like to once again thank our CFO, Susan, and her team for their diligence over the budget season. The finance team is the real MVP. I would also like to thank our board members for their care and concern for our team members and working diligently to ensure we can get this budget over the finish line. As I mentioned in prior meetings, our budget emphasized public safety, fiscal stewardship, and a pathway to sustainable growth. We successfully achieved these goals with our final product. From our new emergency equipment to fully funding our new union fire contract, to reducing our millage rate for all district taxpayers, and making massive investments into water quality and drainage, we continue to make strategic investment towards the future of the district. While we have several highlights, including investments in public safety, which I've previously discussed, I would like to address the media narrative that recently popped up in headlines that indicates our budget is cutting $3.1 million into roadway repairs and maintenance around Walt Disney World Resort. Our budget spends $13 million this upcoming fiscal year, on roads around the district, including our investment of $2.7 million in phase 1 of our guardrail project to bring our guardrail up to the Florida Department of Transportation standards. Any budget adjustments weren't cuts. Instead, these were elements due to the construction and maintenance projects that we tangibly cannot fill due to lingering effects of the pandemic and global supply chain. We intend to continue the regular maintenance schedule for fiscal year 25 when those tools we need to undertake these projects become available. In the meantime, we've returned $3.1 million of those dollars back to our taxpayers. Work can resume in the next fiscal year, barring continued supply chain disruption. Additionally, our budget also resolves some of the ongoing concerns related to annual passes to Disney parks for our employees. Over the last 2 months, we've received a lot of constructive criticism and worked diligently to enhance employee benefits. While we have more extensive discussions surrounding annual passes later this meeting, I am pleased to announce that our budget will include a $3,000 stipend per employee and retirees under certain circumstances. Our collective intention is to hold employees harmless during this continued transition from Reedy Creek to the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District. As a district leadership team, we have made every effort to consider the concerns of our teammate regarding the annual pass program. Since the announcement of our program adjustment in early August, we've met with nearly all of you personally, the staff, to discuss this topic, ultimately directing concerns with more than half of the district staff. Our board members have followed suit, undertaking listening sessions with multiple departments. Supervisor Unks and Supervisor Bearcat was out today garnering employee feedback following this announcement. Our team shared that these passes were extremely valuable and in some cases provided an opportunity for our staff to do their job duties here. With that in mind, we're doing everything possible to enhance the annual pass program, and this stipend is a part of that process. District leadership ultimately determined that $3,000 was the actual cost of purchasing the equivalent past benefits are currently held by most employees. Employees have received correspondence from our Chief of Staff, Paula Hoisington, outlining the benefits policy. These details of the stipend program have been posted online along with the rest of the board packet on page 85. The packet is available on the district website, and the program outlined as follows. For new employees, including full-time hourly salary and non-exempt, will receive an annual stipend after 90 days of hire. For current employees, the stipends will be issued annually per the district fiscal year and are subject to applicable tax withholding requirements. We are working with our union employees to ensure that any employee covered under the collective bargaining agreement that the district has the same event. They also have the same benefit. With regards to retirees, there are additional stipulations required to the stipend. I encourage them to read the full program document, which again is outlined online, and you can contact our HR department. These provisions will sunset after 2 years unless renewed and reviewed by the board. I am working with our finance teams to get this distribution out in place as soon as possible. While at this time we're unable to disclose the details of the ongoing discussion that Central Florida Tourism Oversight staff is having with our taxpayer, I'm exceedingly optimistic about a solution that's coming soon. I will provide an update as soon as possible. In the meantime, we're providing the resources to meet our budgetary obligation. We will have a larger discussion on the topic later in the meeting. For now, I would like to call up our CFO, Susan, to present our final budget for fiscal year 2024. Susan?
Thank you. This is our fourth public reading and presentation on the ad valorem budget covering the general fund and the debt service fund. In July, we discussed and voted on the proposed millage rate that went on our trims. In August, we had a detailed budget workshop. 2 weeks ago, we voted on our tentative budget, and today we'll be presenting our final budget and millage for your approval. A lot of these slides will be familiar. And most have not even changed since the 2 week ago presentation. So starting with our assessed values, $15.3 billion for fiscal year 24. This is the basis that we apply our millage rate to. Our debt millage rate, 3.96, a decrease from 4.64 mils for the prior year. And our operating millage rate of 8.99 mils, which is a decrease of 9.26 mils. Because we participate in the state of Florida truth and millage process, I am required to inform you about the rollback rate. The rollback rate is the rate that would generate the same taxes as prior year, taking into consideration the new assessed values and the new construction of $265 million. The rollback rate calculated is 8.2610, and our millage rate of 8.99 is 8.82% above the rollback rate. This slide is representative of our total revenues. There's no change from our tentative budget, with ad valorem being $188.4 million, which is the majority of our total revenue. We discussed before our permits and fees. We are currently doing a rate study to make sure that our building and safety is collecting revenue to cover the costs of their department, and we will bring those rates to you at our October meeting for you to vote on. For our expenditures, we do have an increase in our total expenditures of $2 million over the $191 million from our tentative. The increase is due to the new pass/stipend program and the district's community outreach initiatives that they are going to begin in fiscal year 24. Our fund balance previously was presented at $36.7 million, is now being presented at $34.7 million. And the decrease is due to the increased expenditures that we just discussed. We do have a new fund balance policy, and our fiscal year 24 ending fund balance will meet the policy. We have $2 million set aside for emergency repairs and replacement, $6 million committed to property appraisers, This is a number that we increase each year, just trying to put money aside in anticipation of the pending lawsuits with the property appraiser. 23.5 million meets our requirements of our 2 months ending fund balance. So that is the summary of the final balance, of the final budget. We will have a public hearing soon. Well, an additional public hearing where we will vote on the millage and the budget. So, any questions?
Any questions or comments from the board?
I do have one question, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Susan, thank you again so much for your work on this budget. I very much appreciate it. And Mr. Gilzine and all of the board members. Specific on public safety, traffic engineering, infrastructure improvements for roadways. I think there's been some misunderstanding online specifically about what this budget does for roadway improvements and for public safety. First, you know, we prioritized early on in this administration back in April to bring all of our guardrails on our roadways up to FDOT standards, whereas I think it was something like 2/3 of them were substandard. Don't quote me on that, but go back to the April meeting. It was a significant percentage of the guardrails on the roadways were not up to the state standards, and so this budget does that. Is that correct?
This is a phased-in approach. So we have 2.7 million budgeted for fiscal year 24. Catherine can tell me if it's either a 3 or 5 year project, but we will be assigning funds each year until that is completed.
So I think the line item that I saw reported that was allegedly cutting back roadway improvements or infrastructure improvements was about voluntary paving program. And as I believe Director Gilzine said, the only reason that's being delayed is because of supply chain issues that are entirely out of our control. It is no way in any manner an attempt to reduce the budget or decrease spending in much needed infrastructure. Is that right? Or can you shed a little bit more light on that?
Yes, that's correct. We still have paving in our budget that I talked about. We have planned paving for some patchwork on Hartzog Road North, as well as paving by Riviera. And yes, this is what we think we can do next year, take into supply care issues and just within our budget and our millage.
Any other comments, questions from my fellow board members? Hearing none, thank you very much, Susan, for your thorough presentation. And we'll move to, does that conclude your report, Mr. Gilzine?
That does, sir.
Okay. We'll move to item 8.1, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Gilzine.
So this particular item, specifically board member Supervisor Perry has been working diligently, and I think he has a report that he would like to share.
Sure. Thank you, Administrator Gilzine, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that I speak for the entire board when I say that I'm grateful for the exceptional quality of the employees of our district. The level of professionalism, the hard work, the commitment is pretty impressive. Over the past 2 months, members of the board and myself have dedicated a very substantial amount of time to meeting employees and finding a good solution to providing passes and benefits that are at least the equivalent of what they have been used to receiving. Now, let me first speak to the employees who are here today. I've really enjoyed getting to know you all. I mean, it's fantastic. And I'm hopeful that we're able to convey that this board genuinely cares about you and your families as people, not just as employees. We heard you, and we have worked to respond accordingly. I know that these passes mean the world to you and that they're much more than a ticket to a theme park. I know you and your families will carry the memories of the visits that you make there probably for the rest of your lives. I know that I have photos from our family visiting back in the early 70s. And boy, it's a joy just to look at them and bring back memories. Some of the people in those photos aren't here anymore. And what a wonderful thing to be able to share a little bit of your work with your family. The passes allow you to share that with the people that you love in a way that, in fact, may well outlive you and me. The work you do in the parks, it's part of your legacy. And so we're committed to ensuring that our employees are compensated fairly for that exceptional work. And now I'd like to speak to everyone and say to you that our employees are an elite group with commitment and skill sets well beyond what is typically the case for a public service organization. They have to be, given the millions of tourists and the advanced nature of the iconic rides and complex infrastructure that exist within the district, which, by the way, is amongst the most technologically advanced in the world. And so I'd like to make certain, to clarify, that the board never intended to do away with the passes, but the change in our relationship with Disney meant that we had to secure them for our employees in a different way. And also, knowing that 70% of the passes were unused last year, we thought it also made sense to provide our employees and retirees who did not use the passes with a new benefit, and that is the freedom to receive the cash value of the passes instead of the passes themselves. We, like most of our employees, initially understood that the passes were standard third-party passes, and we set the value accordingly. We have since discovered that the passes and their features were much more than that and were, in fact, designed for people who are committed to servicing and supporting the parks, not merely for attendees. Having said that, we very much want to encourage our people who can and who are able to use the passes at every opportunity. This has a very significant benefit to all stakeholders. To help in understanding the nature of this stakeholder benefit, let me share from my personal experience. For 25 years, I was CEO of a technology company that provided airline reservation systems to airlines around the world. Those airlines understood that it benefited them to provide flight passes to our employees, since the airline saw the very real benefit to the airline if our employees flew their airlines and became familiar with their offerings on a personal level. Support for the airlines was enhanced significantly. Likewise, in terms of delivering an elite level of support, the Disney passes have a benefit that goes far beyond benefiting our employees. This is particularly true with regards to enhancing safety. For example, if a 911 dispatcher receives a call about someone having a heart attack or heat exhaustion or other issue, if that person knows the park because they're a frequent visitor themselves, they will more rapidly be able to know what immediate help is close by, and they'll know the best nearby alternatives for assisting the person that is in distress in those precious seconds immediately after the call. Or consider the benefits if a first responder who has been frequenting the parks knows from personal experience the quickest way to get to a person in need. If a call comes in regarding one of the iconic rides, someone who knows the ride will likely provide better support than someone who does not. Seconds saved often equate to lives saved and better outcomes for everyone. We therefore want to encourage our people to use the passes on every possible occasion. It's good for them, and it's good for all stakeholders. Now, I know the administrator is diligently working and making every effort to rapidly implement these adjustments, and I'm confident that we will be able to give you the details very soon. As we continue to work through these details, we once again want to thank you all for your extraordinary efforts and your hard work. Thank you. Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Any other comments or questions from the board?
Well, I have a couple comments. I know a motion hasn't been made, but I want to thank Supervisor Perry for working and for that overview for those who may not be aware of what has taken place behind the scenes. I also want to thank the employees for taking the time and having a very honest conversation with myself, and so it seems the other board members. I know it's, as I said before, it's a very unusual place to be, but there it's not lost on us. There are human beings and lives that are impacted by that, and that is not taken lightly, nor is it something that's being overlooked in any way. I think again, Supervisor Perry, the way you explained it about the ongoing negotiations in order for this board to try to find a resolution, but also find our, that happy medium between our fiscal responsibility and the balance of what we are putting in place, along with a consistent or continued attempt to provide rich benefits to anyone who works here, but to continue to have the high caliber that we see around here. And so I hope that all of you can understand that is certainly a priority in continuing on, but wanting to hopefully again with the details of being able to be provided yet, but hopefully that is being seen by all members and all stakeholders inside the district. But I want to reiterate something that was said last time and by Supervisor Perry, and I echoed it then. I'll echo it now. Having worked in private sector and working in another, from a board standpoint, another public entity, the caliber of professionals here is truly unmatched, and it's understood because of we're on the world stage here, and it's not just the stage, but it's the safety component, and that's the experiential standpoint. And so it's an honor to work with you all, and that's why I want to make very clear that it is a commitment to see that we continue to drive unique benefits to get the elite class of staff and professionals that has had been since the beginning of this district. So I thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Any other comments or questions from the board?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to weigh in and first thank Mr. Perry for his eloquent words, and also Supervisor Ziegler for all of her work on this issue, and all of the board, and Mr. Gilzine and Susan and Paula and Mr. Krikis and everybody who's worked on this. Chief Fiore has been working on this as well. One of the things I said in our August meeting is that I don't want our employees to feel left out of this budget. And I'm hopeful that after tonight, you will see that this board was responsive and available to you. We were accessible, we were responsive, and we're being accountable. And good government should be transparent, accountable, and responsive. We have to be transparent in the fact that the old way this program was structured could no longer legally continue. And so we needed your help, your expertise, your voices to be heard so that we could work together collaboratively to find a better way to move forward that gave you as close to the same experience as you had before. I want you all to know that we sincerely value you. We cherish your expertise. We value your commitment to the district. We thank you for sticking with us on this and for also participating in your government. And I want you to continue to do that. And I also want to thank our taxpayer partner for collaborating so far on this issue and for working with Mr. Gilsey. And I look forward to many, many more collaborations to come. So thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Any other comments or questions from the board? I couldn't say it any better than my fellow board members, and I very much appreciate all the hard work that my fellow board members have put into this and their time and commitment and sensitivity to the issue. And with that, is there a motion that we adopt the policy of 8.1?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Let the record reflect. Motion passed unanimously. Let's move to public hearings. Resolution 650. Mr. Ardeman?
Yes, sir. Resolution number 650, a resolution amending resolution number 369, deleting privilege fees and reaffirming permit requirements for telecommunications companies' usage of district property and providing for severability, conflict, and an effective date.
Do we ask for public comments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's fine. It's
Okay.
not a public hearing, but it's appropriate for public comment.
Okay. Are there any public comments with respect to Resolution 650? Yes, ma'am?
I just have a question. What are the privilege fees being deleted?
That's, I'm sorry, Chair, would it be more
can't hear.
appropriate?
Yes. Please address us from the podium. And for the record, because it's being transcribed, please tell us your name again.
Yes, Debbie McDonald. I just had a question. What are the privilege fees being deleted? I just didn't know the resolution. What is
Mr.
that?
Ardeman, could you please explain that to her?
Certainly. Uh, the the legislation that existed previously allowed for the district to charge a fee for telecommunications providers located in district rights of way. That legislation changed. It no longer allows that, and therefore we're changing the policy, the resolution that exists in the district, which allowed the district to charge that fee, to now not allowing the district to charge that fee, at the same time reaffirming the other provisions that allow the district to regulate telecommunications and other things in its rights of way.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And is there a motion that we adopt this resolution?
I will so motion.
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Let the record reflect the motion passes unanimously. Resolution 650, Mr. Ardeman.
Yes, it's 651, I think there.
Yeah, excuse me, 651.
Yes, a resolution number 651, final millage rate. This is a request for the board to consider and adopt a millage levy for fiscal year 2024 and adoption of resolution number 651. The Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, through you all as the Board of Supervisors, hereby intends to levy an operating millage rate of $8.9900 per $1,000 of assessed value for fiscal year 2024, which is 8.82% more than the rollback rate of 8.2610 computed pursuant to Florida Statute 200.065, and that the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, through its Board of Supervisors, hereby intends to levy a debt and a debt service millage rate of $3.9600 per $1,000 of assessed value for fiscal year 2024, thereby levying a total millage rate of $12.9500 per $1,000 of assessed value for the fiscal year 2024. And this is a public hearing, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, this issue has been discussed extensively by the board and others for the past several meetings. But are there any public comments on this resolution? Seeing none, is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve resolution number 651.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Let the record reflect the motion passes unanimously. Next, resolution 652, Mr. Ardeman.
Yes, sir. Resolution 652, final budget. This is a request for the board's consideration and adoption of the final fiscal year 2024 budget for the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District as presented, and adoption of resolution number 652. The Central Florida Tourism Oversight District set forth the appropriations and revenue estimate for the final budget of fiscal year 2024 in the amount of $228,329,542, and that the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District hereby, through its Board of Supervisors, adopts a final budget for the fiscal year 2024. This is also a public hearing, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, we've discussed this extensively too for the past several meetings. Is there any public comment on this?
My apology. I know you've discussed it. I just had a couple questions from the printout online. The security and emergency management showed nothing for the fiscal year 2023 and 2.3 million for 2024. I don't know if that was just a typo or that's a new area. I'm sorry?
So, you know, you've come to several of our meetings and you've heard me say this before, but this is a time for public comments. If you have questions, we will meet with you, Mr. Gilzine or someone from his staff, but this is not a time for questions. You've heard me say it before. It's
Okay, then I'll just make my last public comment. I did notice that the planning and emergency road raise were reduced by 3.1 million, and I just want to express concern for our area because that's a very large cut. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Is there a motion on this resolution?
I will so motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Let the record reflect that resolution passes unanimously. Resolution 653, Mr. Ardeman.
Yes, sir. Resolution 653, final utility rates. This is a public hearing to consider adoption of proposed utility rates and budget for the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District Utilities Division. Request for the board's consideration and adoption of proposed rates for water, chilled water, electric, hot water, reclaimed water, solid waste, natural gas, and sewer for customers served by the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, effective for the first meter reading after September 17, 2023, Resolution 653, as a public hearing, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, this resolution was discussed extensively by our consultants and the board here earlier. Are there any public comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
Move to approve agenda item 9.4.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Let the record reflect the resolution passes unanimously. Resolution 654, Mr. Ardeman.
Yes, sir. Resolution 654, final utility budget. Request that the board consider and adopt final fiscal year 2024 utility budget for the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District as presented, Resolution 654, also a public hearing.
This as well has been discussed extensively already, but are there any public comments? Hearing none, is there a motion we adopt this resolution?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Let the record reflect the motion passes unanimously. Next, Resolution 655, Mr. Ardeman.
Resolution number 655, a resolution of the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District adopting an emergency management plan.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I would like to call Tanya Naylor to come up and give some commentary on this resolution.
Good evening, distinguished board chair, board members, Mr. Gilzine, Mr. Ardeman. Today, I'm pleased to present the Hurricane Emergency Preparedness Plan for your approval. The district's commitment to preparedness has allowed us to efficiently face impending storms and swiftly recover, thus allowing and enabling our taxpayers to resume normal operations. As Chris Ferraro said, our Central Florida residents often turn to the district during a storm. They feel safe here to bring their families. Our hotels remain fully powered. We have facilities that allow for the strength of the hurricane winds. We have provisions of food and water that are readily available to our guests. This responsibility is one we hold with the utmost gravity, which is why we have diligently formulated our comprehensive emergency management plan for the hurricane. Its purpose is to guarantee that our taxpayers can continue to receive essential services during these extraordinary weather events. Over the past 9 years, this plan has evolved through rigorous post-event evaluations, with the district team playing a pivotal role in its success. This marks the first emergency management plan brought before the board, underscoring our unwavering dedication to our community's safety and well-being. Thank you for your consideration this evening on this. Do you have any questions?
No, just thank you for an excellent presentation and for always keeping us safe, Tanya. We appreciate all your good work, and that was a fabulous presentation. Any comments from my fellow board members?
Yeah, I'd like to just say that I've had the opportunity to tour and get involved a little bit in understanding the emergency management plan and what we do and the services. It is incredibly, incredibly impressive. You should be teaching a course to most of the companies in this area on how to prepare.
Thank you.
I just think it's fantastic. Thank you for what you've done.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments or questions from my fellow board members? Hearing none, thank you very much, Tanya.
Thank you.
And this also is open for public comment. Any public comments? Any further discussion by board members? If not, is there a motion we approve this resolution?
I move we approve resolution number 655.
Is there a second? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Let the record reflect that the resolution passes unanimously. Any unfinished business or other business that needs to come before the board?
Mr. Chair, if I could just have a couple minutes to just comment on a few things. So first of all, I just wanted to publicly thank, I was fortunate today to spend some time with Mike Krickus and the entire environmental services team and Craig Sant from the construction team. And I wanted to circle back and absolutely echo what's said earlier. Mike, you and your team are an absolutely first-class operation. I think it's important to mention for many, many years, that team in this district is well regarded throughout the entire state as kind of best in class, from the mosquito control to the overwhelmingly healthy and productive fish ponds, top to bottom. It is a first class. We have in first class environmental quality standards in preserving the quality of an ecosystem that's really central. You know, people talk. These are the headwaters of the Everglades we're talking about, and it's truly a tremendous public trust in this district's hands. And Mike, you and your entire team carry that torch, and I want to know that I want you and your team to know that that's appreciated by this board, and I think throughout the state. And thank you for your efforts. And as to Craig and his team on the construction side, it is no easy task to run a construction operation anywhere, but certainly not in one of the most high trafficked and highly visible tourist destinations or destinations of any kind in the entire world. It is truly a high degree of difficulty job, top to bottom, and Craig and his team do it first class. So thank you, Craig, for that. And I want to underline, for all of this board's criticisms of the prior board's actions, none of that should be taken as any kind of a criticism, and I stand by them. And none of that should be taken as any kind of reflection other than absolutely appreciation of what the employees of this district have done. I at least, speaking for myself, and I think I would say certainly for the rest of the board, they've said earlier, it's just a tremendous operation in this district. And from those that have been with the district from 1 year to 40 years, we appreciate you all. So thank you so much. And finally, just to thank, I was also privileged to speak with leadership from the Celebration CDD and from South Florida State College about future partnerships with CFTOD and their organizations, and sort of potential maximizing of the land use potential, as well as potential partnerships. And I want to thank them for their time, and certainly a specific thanks to Senator Dennis Baxley, who represents this district ably and very ably in Tallahassee, to speak, who had some questions and talk about our duty as a board to report to the legislature on our activities and future goals, and specifically sort of our best practices in governance. And we've got a really exciting opportunity to set a new standard for a blueprint for efficient and transparent government and effective and accountable public and private partnership. And I would say so thank you to the Senator for his time. And what I would say again to the employees, number one, you can take great pride in providing a tremendous level of services to, as has been said, a district, a destination that makes memories for families all around the world. But also in this new era, we're going to be creating a new blueprint for best practices in government that will, I think, be a blueprint not just throughout the state of Florida, but throughout the country. And so you can all take great pride in being part of that new effort. So thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Supervisor Bearcat, for those very appropriate comments, and I endorse everything you said, and thank you for making those comments. Any other comments from the board? Any other unfinished business or new business that needs to come before the board? Hearing none, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you all for attending today's meeting.
Yeah. Smooth.